New York City. Take a look at this. Just last week, the city recorded 43 shootings, up more than 300% from the same period in 2019. And Sean, already this week, at least 17 people were shot in a single day. And this happened just hours after a one-year-old boy was tragically shot and killed at a cookout with his family. And this is all happening amidst calls to defund the police. And as you know, Mayor Bill de Blasio has decided to slash almost $1 billion from the police budget. And now, what are some of the consequences of that? Well, police officers are trying to retire. New York City has seen a 411% increase in officers filing for retirement. And you wonder why some of these officers want to retire. Well, it's not just the money. It might be instances like this. Take a look. What you're seeing here is an officer being violated, and the violence and the disrespect, it hurts your head to watch. It's hard to believe. And that's just a couple of examples. We don't have the time to show you everything that's out there because there's a lot. But let's bring in our company to discuss all this. With us today is Trump Senior Legal Advisor Jenna Ellis and host of WMAL Morning on the Mall, Mary Walters. Ladies, welcome.
Thanks.
Well, Jenna, I want to start with you as the lawyer out there. We see this video, and there's so many of them. This one's pretty explicit, of women twerking in front of a police officer on him. If this happened to anybody else in public, if that happened to me, I'd be violated, sexually harassed. I would call the cops. So what rights does a police officer have in this scenario against these women or pedestrians who are violating his space?
Yeah, well, first of all, that's absolutely disgusting, and everyone should be outraged by that video, because police officers, just because they're in uniform, it doesn't mean that they don't still have the same rights as citizens. And so, this is something where obviously there was a violation there, and there should be arrests made. And so police officers, of course, this is why we're all debating the qualified immunity standard for police officers as well, because when they're acting under color of law, meaning they're in their professional capacity, not just personal capacity, then it does give them some shield from civil liability when they're handling these types of situations. And to see the aggression and the outrage and the mistreatment there, I think we do need to have a more sophisticated conversation than just defunding the police. Otherwise, we're not going to get officers who are willing to put their lives on the line and will find themselves in more and more of these instances that are just remarkably outrageous and are victimizing, genuinely.
Mary, I couldn't agree more with what Jenna's saying. I mean, these are folks, I know in the wake of George Floyd, we talked about the bad apple out there in Minnesota that did that despicable act. And like any profession, there are bad people. But these individuals, these men and women who go out and protect us and defend us and rush into harm's way, don't deserve to be disrespected like this. And what I'm trying to figure out is, how do we collectively start to appreciate and applaud all of the, I don't know what it is, probably hundreds of thousands of great police officers and law enforcement agents, because we want good people joining law enforcement and not to be worried about it.
Well, I think the majority of people do appreciate police officers. I know whenever I see a police officer, I make it a point to go up and thank them for what they're doing, because they are disrespected. But it's really in these inner cities, in these cities where you're seeing all of this unrest, that's where you're seeing this. Whereas I think out in the suburbs and other areas, you see a lot of support. I believe it was on Long Island. There was a parade in a town. They said, we're going to get out and we're going to support our police officers. And you just saw a road, and it was all races, children, adults. They're carrying American flags, and they did this to show support for police officers. So I think this is a minority of people who don't want to see the police, who are disrespecting the police. And unfortunately, we're allowing 2% of the population to run the show. And it can't be. There needs to be some consequences.
Mary, you touched on something that I thought was really interesting. I know that a lot of times over the last, decade or so, we have this habit of now walking up to people in uniform who are serving our country in the military and saying thanks for your service. Based on what you just said, I'm wondering if that should be a trend now, walking up to police officers and just saying thank you for your service, because I think for a lot of them, they're getting grouped in with the bad guys, and to let them know that members of the community appreciate their service, because they're not doing this for the money, my goodness.
Yeah, I've done it for a while now, and I just think now more than ever, I personally think it's just really, really important to let them know that we don't all look on them with disdain. There are some of us who actually really appreciate what they do, and we recognize the sacrifice that they and their families make. So I do it, and I think it would be a great trend. Why not? It doesn't cost anything.
Yeah, it's a great idea. Well, yesterday we brought up that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said when asked in a town hall, what would happen, why was the spike so high in crime? And she said because people were, couldn't pay their rent, they needed to steal bread. But what she went on to say also was something else that I want to show to you guys, and we just have a quote of it I want to show. She asked, when people ask her, what does a town look like that has defund the police? She says, well, a town that defund the police looks like, I tell them, it looks like the suburbs. I think this is a really interesting point that she's acting like if you take the police out of a city, all of a sudden we create this utopia where, not that all suburban areas are utopias, but you create this area that's safe and low in crime. But there are police in the suburbs. I mean, I think it's interesting she's trying to make a point like this, Jenna, using something, well, actually, one, has police, and two, where you have people that move out of cities to get away from high crime levels. I mean, it's just really interesting. These people try to keep making the point of why crime is all of a sudden high and pointing to situations that don't even make sense.
Well, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is completely just distanced herself from rational reality in all of her arguments. I mean, we all know that suburbs, as part of communities, have law enforcement and have police officers to make sure that everyone's safe. That's part of community. And so when you're talking about why the suburbs are, in her perception, these really great, well-working communities, it's because everyone works together. There's community watches. There are law enforcement that do come, and they're also respected. I mean, we all have seen, all of the children's books and all of the, the old time shows that actually put police officers in a light of being a responsible parent or a responsible community member that, the children looked up to and actually respected. And so she wants to make the argument that we need to look like the suburbs, then maybe it's time that we respect police officers and give them that credibility and that respect as someone who's part of the community, not someone that we're isolating and looking at as evil.
Mary, the one thing that I agree with what Jenna just said, but the one thing that's missing is that it's just patently false. I mean, there's no suburb. I've grown up in a small state in a what would you consider a suburb town. I live in a suburb now, and the idea that somehow that you don't need police in suburbs is just patently false and stupid. And that's the other aspect of her statement that's not getting any blowback. I mean, I don't understand how no one actually challenges her on these patently false and stupid things that she says.
Well, three things, three quick points. First of all, expecting AOC to make a cogent point is expecting, like teaching my cat how to tap dance and expecting the cat to pick it up. It's never going to happen, and you shouldn't have expectations that high. The second thing, maybe people wouldn't have to steal food because they don't have bread if they had maybe, I don't know, an Amazon headquarters in their neighborhood, which she stopped from coming in, and she stopped the jobs from coming in. So stop with that. And number three, she knows what suburbs are. She's acting like she has no clue. She knows what suburbs are because there's a really lovely suburb just north of New York City, which is upper middle class, called Westchester, which is where she grew up. So the whole thing, it's just a show. That's all she is. She is a front, and it's all a show. And to pay any mind to her, I think, is just a waste of your time if you're looking to her for, I think, ideas for Congress or for her to represent you in Congress. I think those people are foolish to expect that.
One person who did push back on her was Governor Cuomo. He said it was factually impossible what she said. So there is one person who stood up. Ladies, it's so good to have you. Thank you for your input. Always great to have you on.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to continue our Battleground 2020 series with the chairman of the North Carolina Republican Party, Mike Whatley. He'll be here to talk about the presidential race in the Tar Heel state, as well as the tight race between Republican Tom Tillis and Democrat Cal Cunningham. And what about the Republican National Convention? How will having the convention in two different states impact the 2020 presidential election?